Quiet on the set. Okay, we're gonna get started. Welcome everybody, and today I'm really excited because we're talking to my really great friend, Mike Smith. Mike not only works with me here at the brokerage at Berkshire Hathaway, but also specializes in cottages. Mike not only specializes in it, but owns one, of course. He has a cottage in Gloucester Pool area and a house in the city, a little pied-à-terre. So he lives the best of both worlds, and who wouldn't want to do that? So welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
And to make this an even better cottage conversation, I had to get us some beverages. One for you. I don't drink beer, but I know Mike loves his beer. So I'm going to drink a beautiful White Claw. So let's get this party started because we're all thirsty when you're thinking about going to the cottage.
Cheers.
Cheers. Oh, that's delicious.
Oh,
Is that a good one?
that's great.
All right.
Thank you.
So we are talking about cottages and what it looks like for a city dweller, us Torontonians, what it looks like to buy a cottage. So why don't we start out with, let's say I'm a buyer and I'm thinking I want to get into buying a cottage and I have no idea where to start. How do you start by interviewing a buyer and what they're looking for and to get them ready and started to buy a cottage? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, I sit down and we just have a conversation to see what exactly their needs and requirements are. Okay. Some people just want a second home that's on the lake, and some people want more of a rustic cottage experience. So some of the first things I ask is, are you available to, or so are you open to having a boat access property?
Yeah, so that's a really great place to start. Do you want water access? So you're basically kind of like a cottage on the island where you don't have road access? Or do you want access via the road? Do you want to be able to drive to your cottage or do you want to be able to take a boat? I know you have water access.
That's right.
You have like 5 boats, right?
I do have about 5 boats now.
5 boats and a sweet 1980s jet ski.
It's a 1990 Kawasaki jet ski.
Awesome. Like the old school ones where you actually stand on them.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a workout.
All right, so let's talk about that. What does it look like? What do people need to consider when it's talking about road access versus water access?
Sure. Water access is basically you're going to be going by boat to your cottage. So you're going to drive into a landing or marina. You're going to park there, unload all your gear and your groceries, your water perhaps, and you're going to bring that across on a boat, and you're going to be cottaging. The advantage to this is you get a lot more bang for your buck, so lower taxes because there's no services. You're going to have a much larger cottage for the same price. So that's the advantage of being a water access. The other nice thing is, as soon as you get to that boat and you load it up, like you're already on vacation. You're already in the water, and it's not part of your commute. It's just enjoying the lake.
Your commute is your boat access, is your boat ride. Okay.
Yep.
And so the advantages make sense that you get more bang for your buck. But let's talk about the disadvantages.
Yes.
When it comes to owning an island, a property on an island. Yeah.
Yeah, there's quite a few. Access in the spring and the fall. You're dependent on the ice or water conditions. So if it's ice and you're snowmobiling across, then you're great. But if it's that couple months at the end and the beginning of each season that you're not going to be able to access your place unless you've got something like an airboat or a hovercraft.
So you have an airboat.
I do.
I know I've seen Mike in the winter like jetting across the lake, full gear, and it's like this massive propeller behind you that's getting you through the ice.
Yes.
Not necessarily something everybody would want to do. Like you're pretty brave to brave these crazy cold winters and take your jet boat out. So it may not be for everybody, but it's a cool way to access the house.
It's not for everyone, but as long as you understand that the services are available, that there are solutions to get you there. There are also close to Georgian Bay and Honey Harbor where I am. There's actually air Ubers, and they'll pick you up and they'll bring you out and they'll bring you to your cottage in the wintertime.
So then you don't necessarily. So then you can actually have a 4-season cottage on an island. It's not necessarily a 2-season usage, which is actually really good news. So if you want to own a couple boats or take the air Uber or water taxis, it's possible to have a 4-season cottage, which is a big deal, and save some money.
Yep. And if you're handy, if you can take a 3-season into a 4-season, that's going to earn you a little bit extra equity there. What
about the services on the island? You mentioned that there may not be any service. What do you mean by that? You mean garbage collection? Correct. Like, what are we talking about?
So there's no garbages, recycling. You're not going to be seeing any gas lines going in. So a lot of that, I'm going to say most of the places that we're going to be running into do at least have electricity. And then if you want propane, you just bring in your own propane tanks, whether it's 100-pound tanks or the smaller ones. It's really as much as you want to lug in.
So just to be clear, your cottage is powered by propane versus gas, but you have it's technically the same service you'd have at home in Toronto. You're just switching out gas for propane.
Yep, that's
And then, so let's say that propane tank needs to be filled. What happens then? There's got to be a service that comes to your island to fill it up, or are you responsible for doing that?
Well, you'd be responsible if you have a large tank on your island. You'd have to essentially barge over a natural or propane tanker. So it's not recommended. You're probably going to be lugging 100-pound tanks at the largest, and on the small side, maybe about 25, 30-pound tanks, just for the whatever you needed to do. I personally lug 100-pound tanks in and out. I put them in the back of my truck, and I go to Costco and I fill them up, and that's my workout for the week. And I'm laughing.
So you are making some sacrifices to save some money.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And when it comes to the amount of people on your island, you're likely not around a ton of people. Like you're likely a handful of people on one island, I imagine.
Yeah,
so it's kind of
4 cottages. Yeah.
Okay, so it's nice and quiet. If you're somebody who really enjoys privacy and doesn't want a lot of people around, it could be a really cool way to do it.
It's a great way of getting privacy.
Okay, so that is the first question you're asking. Do we want water access or do we want road access? I imagine most people in their first cottage are going the road access route.
I'm going to say probably about 90% of the people I talk to want road access.
Okay. So now I'm a buyer. I'm like, Mike, I want road access. What are some other things you talk to these people about so they understand the differences of owning a house in the city versus owning a cottage?
Sure. The next question I ask is, how far do you want to drive?
Good question.
This is something that you're going to be a lot. If you're a remote worker, it's a little bit different. But if you're a 9-to-5er and you need to be back in the city and you're fighting traffic, how far do you want to drive is a really big question. And most people say 2.5 to 3 hours is the maximum, which is pretty good. That brings us right out north of Perry Sound, as well as out to the
like Kawarthas. Like Georgian Bay. You kind of have, if someone's like, listen, I'm willing to drive 2.5, 3 hours, we have a lot of cottage country to choose from.
We really do.
Which is really cool. We're very lucky that way.
Fantastic.
Okay. So driving distance, what's another question you're going to ask?
Oh, after that is typically, what's the budget we're looking at?
Fair.
And that's going to dictate a lot of times what kind of cottages we're going to be seeing. Whether it's going to be a river access or a riverfront or a lakefront, different water qualities will give you a different price point.
What would be the difference? So a riverfront and lakefront, I had no idea that there'd be an even difference. So are we talking significant price difference?
I'd say not necessarily significant. I would say noticeable.
Okay. So what about asking people if they're handy? I know if Jay and I bought a property, there's no way either one of us would be able to maintain it without having like a handyman present at all times because neither one of us have those skills. I know you're incredibly handy. Mike's actually building basically your own bunkie to Airbnb on your property. Like you're literally out there hammering on the roof and doing all the building of the actual structure itself. We don't have those capabilities. So what about that side of it? Because cottages need a lot of upkeep.
They really do. I think cottage is Latin for work. I think when you get there, you have to
that's a good one.
Unpack your tools or buy some more, some new ones. But there's always something to do. There's a lot more involved and a lot more maintenance. Like for example, I'm on the Trent Severn Waterway. So very recently, a large boat went by with a big wake and knocked a bunch of boards off my dock. So I'm going to be out there doing some repairs this coming week. But there's always something.
There's always something. Listen, there's always maintenance in our own houses. So imagine you're technically owning 2 houses. There's going to be maintenance in both. I think the cottage side is just a little different because you don't have accessibility like we do in the city to all of our people that could just pop in and do something. You're likely probably waiting longer to get things done, I imagine, maybe?
The tradesmen, if they're good, they're very busy. And the other thing is the materials and how you're getting it to the cottage.
Right, because you being on an island, you're barging over your materials, aren't you?
That's right. Everything comes from truck to boat to site.
Okay.
But even if you're driving it in, you're going to be going into one of the major hubs, like if north be like Midland, Orillia, Graveners, Bracebridge, Huntsville. somewhere with like a Home Depot or a hardware store, and
Yeah.
you'll be loading up all your lumber and materials. Then you're going to be bringing that back to the cottage.
Is there any premium not only to the materials, but also the people doing the work because you're out there and have access to less people to work with?
I think you're going to find a premium to get people out to your job sites.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Something to consider.
But I don't. The materials. There might be delivery cost or a surcharge on that, but for the most part, Home Depot is Home Depot.
Right.
And Home Hardware is the same as well.
Okay.
You pop in your local guy and you fill up on all your nails and fasteners, and it's going to be the same prices.
Okay. And then let's talk systems. So now you have this cottage, or you found a cottage. You're making sure it doesn't need a ton of repair.
Right.
But now they're looking at things that we don't have here. For example, in the city, we're attached to sewer systems. Cottage country, you're looking at wells and septic beds. So let's talk about that. What does that mean? Are we pulling water from the lake? And how is it getting clean so we could use it? What is a septic bed? Let's talk about those systems, because they're like new to anybody who's looking to buy a cottage for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. The water systems that we're seeing is going to be basically drawing from the lake itself. There are some lake houses that have a drilled well, but that's a large expense.
Okay.
Being next to such a large body of water, it just takes a few filters. For me, it's 2 filters, a UV light, and a tannin tank to remove the tea-colored water, and that makes our water drinkable out of the tap. So that system can cost, I'd say, a few $1,000s to get installed. But for the most part, it gets you up and running versus drilling a well for $30,000.
Right. So that's why if you ever go to the cottage, you see those massive pipes going into the water.
That's
Maybe
right.
you might have stepped on them in the lake when you're in the lake. It's because most people are going to draw it from the lake. It makes sense. If you could clean it, it does make sense, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so then now we're drawing water from the lake. Let's talk about septic beds. If you guys have ever been to a cottage and you see a massive mound and you're wondering, I wonder what's underneath there, it's likely a septic bed. So
100%.
100%, right? So, we see a lot of those out north of Toronto, like King City and the different big rural properties, but we don't see that in the city of Toronto. So let's talk about what is a septic bed.
Sure. A septic bed's typically a few different parts. There's the tank. It's got a couple chambers in it. And then when your black or gray water passes through the tank, it goes into a septic or like a weeping bed. And that's just several runs. The old ones used to be clay or weeping tiles. Now the new ones are just plastic with holes. And it just from there, the effluent will go through your filter sand
and just
be
goes right
evaporated out.
into the ground.
It'll be right into the soil, and it's filtered out that
Okay.
way, and the bacteria in the soil just breaks up all the...
Beautiful. And so you mentioned black and gray water. I know what that is because I love to drive an RV. I don't do the physical driving, that's Jason's job, but we had to learn about black and gray water in order to manage the water in the RV because, of course, we had to plug into systems at the different parks. So just quickly, what is the difference between black and gray water?
Sure. Gray water comes out of any of your taps or the shower. That'd be a great example of your gray water. Black water is strictly the toilet. So anything that comes through there is one you don't want to mess up with your lines on the RV.
True. We learned that. Yes, we definitely learned that.
I've learned that too.
So if we have to depend on a septic bed, how long is this system lasting? And is there anything we have to do to maintain it as owners, or can we just let it go?
A lot of the old school of thought for these septic beds would be if it's not broken, don't fix it. The new ones like to see you pump out, I think, once every 2 to 5 years or something like that.
Okay.
Just to make sure and then you get it inspected at the same time to make sure the filters are in place. But that's really all that's involved for maintenance. The biggest part of maintenance with a septic bed is prevention, and that means what you put into your septic bed or into your septic tank. So there's certain things you don't flush. So anything that doesn't break down or isn't biodegradable doesn't go down your drain.
Got it, because then you're risking ruining it. And I imagine a septic bed is quite expensive to fix or replace for that matter.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
a huge expense.
And it depends where it is. Like I've got a remote one that's up on a hill, and it's going to get to it, and it's someone to rip it apart and figure out what went wrong. It would be catastrophic.
Okay.
If you're just in town, like some guys that get runs installed for $8 to $12 grand,
Okay.
which is a minor expense for a septic. But when you're dealing with anything boat access or cottage wise, there's probably a little bit of a bump on that for the extra drive and getting all the equipment out there as well as all your materials. So the word of the wise, organics only into the septic.
And then it will last as long as it can, basically.
As long
as
as it
you're
can.
taking care of it.
Yep.
Okay, so I am looking to buy a cottage.
Yep.
I'm obviously going to, or my clients are looking to buy a cottage. I'm obviously going to put in the typical conditions, financing, inspection on the cottage itself.
Yes.
And I imagine there's inspections for these systems, septic,
Oh, yes.
testing the water, things like that. There's obviously you do that, right? Like that's something people want to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Much like a well, you can, I don't know, you can test the lake water if it's untreated.
I guess it doesn't really matter, right? Like it's not like testing a well. I'm testing a well to make sure it's drinkable water,
Right.
right? But would they test the water coming out of the tap to make sure that the filters and the UV system that you talked about is in place properly, or?
We can put it there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's for the safety of the buyer to have it there.
Okay.
And whether they wish to waive or fulfill that by getting their water tested, it's up to them. It's just going to be lake water. But if it goes through their treatment in UV light,
Yeah.
then anything that goes through UV light is going to be
It's going to be good.
good for E. coli.
I get, and then if you're testing the water, you're bringing the water to the local city,
Yep, the health centers will do it.
and then they just do it like what? Takes a day to get the results of the water
It's
testing,
usually,
a day or two?
1 to 2 days.
Okay.
They're usually pretty quick, fast turnarounds. During COVID, a little bit longer delays, of course, but now
Okay.
it's pretty fast. And no sweat there.
Okay. So now I'm an owner of a cottage. Very exciting. We won't get into.
We have to finish what other clauses you're going to put in there.
Oh, is there other clauses? Well, do
Oh,
tell,
I
Michael.
have to finish that one off. So for the septic, the big one is that as long as we're not going into the winter, we're going to have that septic pumped.
Oh, smart. So they pump it before the new owners take over.
Think of it as a fresh
Smart.
start. So you want to make sure that it's just going to be whatever you put in, and not necessarily
Not
what's
somebody
left
else.
from the previous owners.
So if they did put in non-organic items and things like that that shouldn't go in there,
Yep.
everything's going to be cleared before you take over.
Yeah, and also
Smart.
like kitchen grease is also a nasty one in there, so
Oh,
it kind
okay.
of bunches
Okay.
up and you got to get it sucked out.
Okay.
So that's a big one, and then you do your inspection of that tank at the same time. New tanks are easy because they're just plastic. The old tanks are concrete, and you have to check for cracks, make sure they're not falling apart and crumbling.
Okay.
And then you'll know if you need a new septic tank just by kind of looking at it. But I've seen septic tanks 6 years old. I've seen septic tanks that are 30 years old, and some that are 5 years old, and they all still work great.
Great. Okay. Anything else that you're putting in there that we wouldn't know about that we wouldn't never do in the city?
Wet inspection is a big one.
Oh, that's a great one. Let's talk about wet inspections. Let's talk about what that is. Like, I don't think a lot of people know what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a wood energy transfer technology inspection,
You sound so smart.
I believe. I might need to Google that again. But it's for wood stoves only, and most cottages have one. If this is an older cottage, some concerns are that the install for the wood stove was not done by a certified chimney installer. So when you have an old cottage, say it's built in the 50s or 60s, it was just a handyman special. Whoever lived there put it together, and it may not have the safety breaks between, say, as it gets vented out a wall or through a roof. You want to make sure that the correct materials were used so that it doesn't create a risk of a fire, essentially. Because the worst thing you'd want would be like a fire in your attic as you're trying to enjoy your cottage on a cold winter
Yeah,
evening.
that would be terrible.
Yeah, kind of the worst thing that could happen. One of the things we usually add in is a wet inspection to make sure that someone comes out and has a look and checks the box saying, yes, this was done correctly, and if not, this is what it needs to be.
This one is, yeah. So for those of you in Toronto who have a real wood burning fireplace, like I do, I had to have a wet inspection. So if you're ever looking to buy a house, it's not just a cottage country thing. If you're buying one here with a real wood burning fireplace, it's actually a Toronto condition as well.
Right, and
Yeah.
I really feel like it's best to get ahead of it because the insurance company is going to be all over you
Yes.
to make sure that there's been something recent or something documented that's been installed correctly.
Yeah, I remember when we bought our house, they asked for it. They said, we want to see proof of your wet inspection.
Big
And I was
time.
like, absolutely. I'm a real estate agent. I know things.
You're like, I got one.
Yeah, here you go.
That's great.
Any other conditions that we wouldn't think about here that will go into here, or is that it?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we've talked about what it looks like for the conditions that you'd want to put in there. But some things that to keep in mind is that some of these roads that you're taking in your cottage are private roads.
Okay.
And there's sometimes what they call a cottage road association, which comes with a fee. It could be an annual fee, could be monthly, depends how they want to break it down. Everyone's different. It's private, and they'll control it. It's usually a group of cottagers will come together to make sure the road's plowed and basically service the road. So if there's any potholes or washouts, there's road fees that you pay annually that will go towards that, fixing it up.
Okay, that's
So-
good to know.
Something to think about, but
Okay.
other than that, yeah.
There you go. So let's talk about buying on a big lake. Like I have a few friends actually who own cottages on Lake Simcoe. It's a massive lake. In the winter, it's cool because they can do ice fishing, freezes over. You see all the ice huts out there and people snowmobiling, how fun. But in the summer, as great as it is to be on that lake, it's slightly colder than a small lake, obviously.
Oh yeah.
But when they have storms, like some of these storm systems come in and really wreak havoc not only on their docks, but also on the water line. So let's talk about the difference of buying on a big lake versus a small lake.
Sure. I think the biggest example would be for a big lake would be on Georgian Bay.
Okay.
Georgian Bay is a mini, slightly smaller version of the Atlantic Ocean.
Really?
Like when the wind whips up and the storms come in, like they are rough. They'll tear trees apart. They'll take the roofs off of houses. Everything's built just a little sturdier out there because it's just a big runway for wind and storms to whip up.
Interesting.
If you're in a smaller lake, the tree line typically protects you from the wind.
Okay.
So you're not going to see the big waves or the white caps coming in. So you're a little bit more protected, a little bit more quiet, but it really depends what you like.
Fair. Like I noticed with the big lakes, you're obviously going to be busier. There's going to be more jet skis and boats and everything else. And some of the quieter lakes, especially if you're in like a cove, dead silence. So I guess it depends. The other thing to consider too, I think, with the busy lakes is the part where your property is, where you may have to have rock buildup to protect the shoreline. That's a really big expense to consider. I know our friends have had to build up the rock shoreline in order to protect the rest of their property from these major storms. And they had to have rocks brought in by these big cranes to build up this rockway to protect their property.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
We have clients on Lake Erie that have just watched their land erode away because it's all sand.
Interesting. And if had they built it up with the rocks, it would have protected it or no?
Yeah, well, it would have, but sometimes the ministry doesn't like to see you alter the shoreline.
Right.
Muskoka is great. It's all big rocks, so you're okay. You just typically have to kind of watch your docks. But for the most part, the wakes you're going to see are boat wake.
Right. You mentioned something interesting, the shoreline. So if Lake Erie, you said it was Lake Erie, right?
Very sandy.
Didn't like them do anything with the shoreline. Who owns that shoreline? How is it that an owner can't do something with their own shoreline?
Well, even though you might own the land, it's still going to be controlled by the ministry because you're on the body of water. So the Ministry of Natural Resources is the be-all, end-all when it comes to altering shorelines, taking a lot of trees off your shoreline, and they do need to sometimes check the box if you're going to be doing some building developments.
Interesting. So you're going to get permits, permission, like what's happening there?
Well, for example, with me on the Trent Severn Waterway, there's several layers of government that we go through for our permissions and permits. So if we're going to be constructing docks, there's a level of government for that, but if we're going to be doing, let's say, putting a shed in the back 40, then we deal with the township on that. So it's tough to navigate sometimes.
Something people probably didn't even realize. I'm sure they thought when they bought their cottage, they bought the land and that they own that right, but not necessarily to do whatever they want. So that's a good point to make, that you may have to check in with the ministry to figure out what you could do there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, ministry's not a big fan of people that come in and clear cut their lots so they can build land.
Fair.
I'd like to see some natural shorelines.
So since we're still on the topic of big lake versus small lake, let's talk about dock systems, because I know that the dock system for a small lake is different than what it might be on a big lake. I know Lake Simcoe, my friends who had their place, had a dock that was quite raised to protect from the weather, and they had to raise their boats. So let's talk about that.
Sure.
Like boat lifts, is it called? A lift? Yeah. Okay.
I think the nicest, best way you can protect your boat at all times from boat wake or storms is going to be a nice boat lift.
Okay.
They're great. They're a little bit on the pricey side depending on the size of your boat. And how nice you want to get it. And then also, if you have a boathouse, sometimes there's lifts that will pull your boat out of the water while it's in the boathouse.
Yes, that I've seen on Lake Muskoka, where they pull them out and then they.
Oh yeah, there's some
quite
really
cool,
you can go low end or you can go really high end.
Yeah.
And you'll see like a flush mount floor comes up with your boat, so everything's like you can walk around it as soon as it's up. There's some beautiful systems out there.
Okay.
You can spend whatever you want to spend. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Price is no limit, no problem.
Sure. Money is an object. How wonderful would that be? Okay. So then you mentioned boathouse. So I'm going to mention boathouse and bunkie. So you have your property, let's say it's the only thing on the property is your actual cottage structure itself, and you decide you want to build a bunkie or a boathouse for that matter. And because you have so much land, unlike in Toronto where we don't have room to build that stuff, same process as here. You go and apply for permits, cross your fingers, you could build one, or can people just go and build a bunkie and stick a bed in there and you're good to go?
The best thing I can recommend is buy a place that already has a boathouse and a bunkie on it. Even if it's dilapidated, it's a lot easier to fix than to ask permission to build a new one. A lot of times, they're not, the ministry and the municipalities don't even want to see a boathouse on the water anymore. They want to see it a little bit more on land. You might need a marine rail system.
Interesting.
It's going to differ municipality to municipality and lake to lake. However, I think if you have something already existing and then you fix it up from there, it's a much easier process to renovate than ask permission for a new.
Okay, great. That's a really good piece of advice, because I know a lot of people want to have all their friends and family up at the cottage, and you kind of need room for all these people to sleep. So those bunkies and boathouses that have the extra room above come in handy.
It really does.
Yeah.
And then once you start, like, I don't know if you're like me, you do like to entertain a lot and you like to have a lot of guests over. And one of the constraints that we're really noticing now is number of bathrooms. So
yeah, that would be a big deal.
Like
when you're done your bunkie, that's going to be Airbnb'd. I plan on testing it out first before you list it on Airbnb, just to, do a quality check.
Thank goodness. It's got to pass Canada's.
So that's a great segue into renting your cottage. So you're somebody who's like, listen, I'm not going to be up there the whole time. I want to make some money on my investment. Why not? Airbnb it, rent it out. How does that look? We know that during COVID, everybody was renting cottages and buying cottages because they didn't want to be in their house 24/7. So I imagine the rental market in Airbnb is quite healthy in cottage country.
It really
I know
is.
I rent cottages, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Especially during peak season in the summer months.
Yeah.
You can't find them.
Yeah.
They'll go for several $1,000s a week.
Several. We're talking 4, 5, 8, 9 grand a week.
Oh, we can see it sometimes like 10 grand. But yeah,
wild.
It
That's
just depends how big it is and how luxurious you want it to be.
Yeah.
But really, it's also how many people are you bringing in. So if it's a lot of bedrooms and bathrooms and everyone's kind of chipping in, it's not so daunting.
You could live La Vida Loca if you have 10 of your friends going to rent out one of those ones on Lake Joe. You feel like you're living like a king.
Like a hero. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
More the merrier.
Yeah. Last piece of information for today, so we could cut this short because we could talk forever. Cottage toys, boats, jet skis, surf boats where they have the wake in the back, paddle boards. Everything needs a license. I was told the other day you need a license to be on a paddleboard. I don't know if I'm super gullible and believe them, but there was some type of special water license they talked about. Now when you're going to be on the lake, motor or non-motor, maybe that's not the case, but all these motorized equipment, like if I was taking out your 1990s jet ski, back in the 90s, I didn't need a license. I could just hop on it and go.
Absolutely.
But I can't hop on your jet ski now without a license.
That's right.
I need a boat license, a boating license.
Yeah, the personal
which I could
watercraft.
write online, but I still need one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So boating license for all motorized equipment, not one of those surf things, One of those surf things that go up in the water. I don't need a
Like a windsurfer?
Yeah, those cool toys that are out right now with the motor on it.
That's a really good question.
Yeah,
Actually, I don't know. I don't know if I have the answer for that.
Okay.
But I do believe that if anything under power and over 9.9.
Over 9.9 miles per hour needs a boating license.
9.9 horsepower.
Horsepower. I don't even know what I'm talking about.
I don't even want to say hold me to that because I don't know what the
Not
regulations
sure?
are.
Okay.
I know you have to be over 16, and then you have to get your personal.
So if I'm going to
watercraft
jump on
license.
anything motorized, I need my boat license.
If you're over at my place, you're going to get into any of the boats.
Yeah.
You need your license.
So let's say I don't have my license and I took out your jet ski and one of the water cops stopped me. What happens?
Yeah, there's OPP all over the water, especially during the summer months. They like to pull you over, check all your documentation, so boat registration. They want you to see your license. They want to check all the safety gear on the boat and make sure there's enough life jackets for the amount of people.
That makes sense. Yep.
I have a 23-foot pontoon boat. Recently, just got pulled over last weekend, and they were even checking the fire extinguisher was and the dates on the fire extinguisher. So they will go through a giant checklist.
This is some serious stuff. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I was paddle boarding with my daughter, and we had our life jackets, but on the paddleboard, and we were along the shoreline. We weren't even out in the lake, just in the shoreline, checking out all the cottages, because I love, people watching at the cottages. And they pulled us over, and I was like, why are you pulling us over? I said I wasn't drinking and paddleboarding. Like I was trying to make a joke, and it was because our life jackets weren't physically on. It's because even though they were on the boards, it was still dangerous, even though we were in like 4 feet of water.
Yep.
So life jackets for everything.
Oh yeah.
Technically, right?
Definitely.
Okay. Anything else about toys we need to know, other than they could cost a lot of money in insurance and gas? Because
Insurance, gas, and
it's
cost.
extra cars at
Yep,
the cottage, basically.
Absolutely. Just to touch on the life jacket part, I mean, there's life jackets for whatever sport you're doing.
Yeah.
So I think if you put on the correct one for whatever sport you're into, like for me, it's more of a fitted like neoprene.
Okay.
For the stand-up wet jet ski, but for
It'd
you,
be way easier to maneuver too if you're on
it really
whatever,
is.
right?
But no, there's like
It's
little
just
small
here.
little triangle ones for people who like to do paddle sports.
Right. Those are way easier than the old school, like with the flap and you're like putting it on.
Like,
Oh my
forget
God,
about
remember
it. You wouldn't
those?
be able to like move your arms.
You go in the water, you're like
Yep.
up like this.
Yeah, it reminds me of like I just watched the movie Titanic and they had these giant vests I put on. Like, no, it's not what you want.
Yeah,
You need
fair.
to tailor what you're wearing for your sport.
For your sport. That makes sense. Never thought about that. Okay. Well, listen, we're going to wrap this up. Is there anything else that people who want to buy a cottage should know before we let them go and have their own cocktails?
Yes, absolutely. Please ensure you talk to someone who's not just your local agent, but a local agent in the cottage area.
Absolutely.
There is a lot to say about someone who eats, breathes, and sleeps that area and lives that cottage life versus just getting your local area to come up or your local agent to go north and show you all the properties. It's a completely different animal.
Completely different animal. We're going to leave Mike's information in the link below. You want to tell them your email address since we're sitting here?
It's not gonna be hard to remember. It's michael@shopcottages.com. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to be here for you.
Great. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank
Thank
you.
you everybody for watching. Enjoy Cottage Country, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me.